All right, guys, what's up? Let me know how the sound is. I think the video should be just fine for this evening. And it sounds like the sound's okay. We'll give it a couple minutes here. Looks like a couple people are stopping by. Hey, Mriddle, how you doing tonight? Appreciate you being around. Video's good. Thanks for letting me know. S stopped by earlier, so we got 8 people watching. I'm not sure if S is hanging out here right now or not. Hopefully they come back. Crown Tail Half Moon is here. Hello, hello. Geek Boy, what's up, man? My fish tanks Aquatic says hello, FishFam. Hey, my fish tanks. Thanks for stopping by. S says they just got home from work. Howdy, howdy. George is here. What's up, man? John Oliver has been a busy man, but he says, hey, Fish Fam, we're glad to have you here. I know you've, I talked to you for just a brief second earlier today. You said you had a lot going on, but we're glad you found some time to stop and say, hey, hang out with us for a little bit on this cool evening here in Iowa. The temperature's a little bit chilly. It drops back down into the 40s. But we're doing okay. It's been windy, so we're hanging on and trying not to get blown away. Deborah Lewis, hey Deborah, how are you? Thanks for stopping by again for this week's episode of the Aquatic Exchange, and we'll see how things are going. We might have a couple people pop in later. For right now, you can expect it to just be me. Once again, if you're watching and you don't know who I am, I'm Mike. This is All Things Fish, and we are an aquarium-based channel, as you can probably tell, hence the name, dealing primarily with freshwater, largely planted tanks and breeding fish. However, I do dabble in salt, and I'm on a journey to get back into salt, so that should be exciting. Rico stands, falling asleep, hit the like, he'll leave the stream running. Thanks, Rico. Appreciate you stopping by. I tuned in. I was lurking in your stream earlier. Sorry, I was a little bit busy. I didn't really have time to chat too much, but always a good show. Take a little sip, stay hydrated here. And tonight we're going to be a little bit might be a little bit more formal than the past couple streams. For those of you that caught me Friday night, that was kind of just a fill in the blank spot. It was a pretty great evening, and it was pretty quiet. Jumped in and out of a bunch of streams. Then I decided that I'd jump on. We talked fish for a little bit. We talked some planted tanks, some different fish. Talked about how things was going, kind of casual hangout. While we filled in the gap before Kenny and Danny from Aquatics popped on. And we ran over there, raided Danikin, and we hung out for a while and had a great time. So what is on the agenda for this evening, it's going to be pretty plant heavy. But if you guys have any non-plant questions, that maybe I can touch on real quick while we wait for people to jump in and see if it gets any busier, I will gladly attempt to tackle whatever you got. I can't make any promises, but we'll see what I can come up with. Muppet929. Hey, howdy, hey, that looks like a dog in a sweatshirt, I think. I'm not quite sure. Regardless. Thanks. Always good to see you guys. How many folks we have hanging out? Looks like 15 or so. Kind of bounced around. 11 people have smashed that beautiful thumbs up button. So thanks to those of you that have done so. If you haven't already, go ahead and share this. I posted it in a couple YouTube groups. I don't really post it on Reddit yet. Maybe I should. We'll see. Occasionally, I'll post on Instagram and see if we can draw some folks in. It's pretty quiet right now. 15 is just fine. Just fine. I'm not too worried about the numbers, but the more, the merrier usually. sometimes it can be problematic. Angus, not a whole lot. Work has been pretty quiet this week. I'm making some progress on some stuff downstairs in the basement that you guys will get to see soon. And that means there's some videos in the work. So expect me to release potentially one tomorrow, for sure one Thursday. And check that stuff out. It should be good. Should be good stuff. Fishymon64, what's up, brother? Alishan's here. Hey, howdy. Hey, Alan Matthews. What's up, Alan? Hope you guys are having a great night. We'll give it a couple more minutes here. We may have a couple guest speakers that decide to pop in. We'll see. We're just going to see what happens. And then we'll get into the official business for this evening. Any top secret government projects in the work? There may be. I don't know. Couldn't tell you if I did. Anthony's here. What's up, Anthony? Haven't talked to you in a while, man. Hope you're doing all right out there in California. I know that, as it's warming up, it's still pretty dry outside, but fire season is getting close. So I know California can potentially, be troubled with fires. So I hope you're doing okay out there. I'm going to see if I can adjust this light just a touch. Maybe get rid of that. It's a little bit better. I need to rearrange. I don't have a great setup over here at the computer desk just yet. Need to rearrange that and get everything squared away. Now, I'm trying a new microphone, just like a cheapie off of Amazon that I happened to find. Let me know what you guys think. Is it better? Is it worse? Should I go back to the old headset mic? Should I go back to the earbuds? And we'll see what you guys prefer. I can't hear it right now. I've got the volume turned down. Angus has some stuff coming in all week, including new fish that should be here Friday. Good stuff. Next is another light and CO2. CO2 is good. We're going to talk about CO2 a little bit tonight. I just figured I'd give it, until about 10 after, and then we'll get to it. S says there's some static in the background. I'm not sure. Let's see if I can adjust the gain a little bit and cut back on that. Let's see. How's that? Is that a little bit better? Turn it down some. But we'll see. We'll roll as we go here. My flight headset doesn't look too different than this one, actually. It's pretty close. We use so I use a Bose A20, which honestly looks like this. It just really says Bose on the side, different shape speakers, but does the same thing. Probably a little bit nicer. Not sure how the Air Force would feel with me using my flight equipment to stream on YouTube, though. Goes away when I talk. All right, well, then I guess I'll just have to not shut up. Anyway, so we got a decent little crew in here. We're almost 20 again. If you want to invite more people, we will be giving some stuff away either throughout the stream or near the end of it. And we'll get down to business. So what we're going to talk about tonight, as the title suggests, as well as the description, is CO2 in the planted aquarium. I don't know if I like that too much. Dude. We'll see. CO2 in the planted aquarium. Old school World War II flight headset. I'll have to see what I can undown. Maybe I can come up with something creative. But like I said, we're going to talk about some CO2 in the planted aquarium. And Fish Guy Nick says a presentation. Yep, I've given this one before. I haven't updated it for a couple years. So if there are any little bits and pieces of information in here that don't look quite right, let me know. And if I don't catch it, hopefully you point it out to me and I'll correct it. If not, Hopefully that don't sound too silly. I try to stay on top of things. But anyway, yep, that's me. I'm Mike. This is a presentation about CO2 in the planted aquarium. Slide, please. Boom. Here's what we're going to talk about. For any of you guys that have been in the military, I'm going to tell you what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about it, and then I'll tell you what we talked about. Standard procedures. So overview, we're going to talk about why you'd want CO2 in a planted aquarium, what equipment is required to add CO2 to your planted aquarium, how you'd set it up, just kind of go over the basics. We'll talk about tuning it a little bit to optimize your CO2 levels, and then we'll talk about extra odds and ends. We'll do questions throughout. There's only about 15, 20 people in here, so don't be shy to ask questions while we're going. We should be able to fit them in just fine. And then closing remarks where, like I said, I'll tell you what I told you. So that's that. If you guys are ready, we'll keep going. Slide, please. About why you'd want CO2 in your planted tank. What's up, Tony? Thanks for stopping by. I'm Mike. As you know, this is All Things Fish, and we're talking about CO2 and planted aquariums tonight. Slide. Why do you want CO2 in your planted tank? It can be daunting and confusing at times, but once you grasp some simple concepts, it makes sense quite a bit. So why would you want CO2? CO2 injection boosts growth rates 5 to 10 times compared to growth in low-tech aquarium and helps tremendously in growing carpets and colored plants. Thin stems, stunted leaves, poor coloration, algae on plants are all common signs that CO2 levels are inadequate for optimal growth. That's a quote from Mr. Dennis Wong, who is from Singapore, I believe. Pretty popular name in the hobby as of the past few years. He did speak at the Aquatic Gardeners Association event in Washington a couple years back. Anyone else lose it? Uh-oh. Are we here or are we back? Uh-oh. Are we back? I see a couple of people say we're back. I refreshed, and it looks like we're here. Let me know if you can, just real quick, let me know where I lost you guys. I see a couple guys said that all right, we're back. Okay. So some benefits. All right, looks like we're good. Benefits of CO2, like Dennis Wong mentioned, 5 to 10 times the growth rate. So if you're trying to farm plants and make a couple bucks back here and there, CO2 is going to grow things faster. It's also going to give you better color, more dense growth, and obviously healthier growth in general. Some plants may require CO2 for growth. Keep in mind that a lot of the plants that we keep are actually grown immersed or primarily out of the water for the majority of the year, except for the wet season. So when they're exposed to the air, they're not completely submerged in the water. They have access to atmospheric CO2 levels, which are approximately 400 parts per million. That's pretty impressive and a drastic change compared to when you submerge them. In a regular aquarium, most plants submerged, your everyday aquarium, assuming, no intervention, usually it's about 4 to 5 parts per million, just quite low. So keep in mind that a lot of the times we'll inject CO2 to supplement those plants that may require those higher CO2 levels because they're not really often found completely submerged. Again, growth and color. You can achieve, faster growth rates, denser growth, and just an overall better looking plant by adding some CO2 to help things along. Now, plants are 50% or better carbon, so it seems silly that people don't consider adding carbon to their tank in the form of CO2, which is how plants naturally acquire carbon for growth. And then algae inhibition, which can be, that's kind of, you can look at that a couple different ways. CO2 helps expedite plant growth, which expedites nutrient uptake, and healthy plants outcompete algae 9 times out of 10. So that's why we might put CO2 in our tank. Did I put together a PowerPoint? This is actually a presentation that I've given for a couple different clubs. So I didn't put it together specifically for tonight's stream, but I'll definitely use it this evening. Slide. So plant requirements. What do plants need for growth? Light, carbon in the form of CO2, and then nutrients, which carbon is, in a sense, you can kind of consider a nutrient, but most of the time we consider it as a separate individual requirement. So light, obviously light's going to drive your photosynthesis for growth. Nutrients, you're going to need your micros, your macros, such as iron, potassium, magnesium, phosphates, etc. And like Fish Guy Nick said, this is kind of the triangle of plant growth. Your light, your carbon, and your nutrients, CO2. Light I often refer to as kind of like the gas pedal for plant growth. How much light the more light you have, the faster you're going to try to grow your plants. Carbon, CO2 is kind of like the air, goes through your air intake. If you have like a turbo or supercharger, that's shoving air into the engine or shoving CO2 into the plants. Then your nutrients are kind of like your fuel. And again, this is a tank by my friend Kyle Dunn. This was kind of the early stages, but he does have CO2 on this. As you can see, there's quite a variety of plants in there. What's up, Scott? How you doing, man? Dragon Layers here. Howdy, howdy. Deborah Lewis. I mentioned carbon, like liquid carbon. Give me a minute. I actually touch on this later in the slideshow. So just stand by on that one for just a moment. If you don't mind, I'll get there. I will get there, I promise. Tony Danford, do you need to add carbon to your tank for better plant growth? You can have an awesome planted tank without CO2 injection. Just understand that your plant selection may be limited. And additionally, your plants will grow a little bit slower. So I'm going to pause for just a moment. And we're going to say hi.
Hi. I was just backstage listening.
Priscilla.
Just continue.
All right.
Hi, everybody.
So give Priscilla a chance to say hi. I know you've been listening. I know you talked to you about it before. But we're talking about CO2 in planted tanks.
Awesome. I love planted tanks and CO2.
So we'll jump back over here and we'll go to the next slide. So growth and color with the addition of CO2. So this is the same plant on the left and the right. On the left is in a tank with similar lighting to the right. However, no CO2. You can see there's a little more space between the internodes, so spacing between leaves. Definitely not the intense red coloration. And this is a mini type 4. In case you're wondering, you can see obviously the one on the right grows much faster. It's growing a lot more compact growth. And then color as well, you can see a lot more of the pink red coloration as opposed to on the left. You kind of have a subtle orangish coloration. Slide. Algae inhibition. Like I said, healthy plants will outcompete algae for available nutrients, and the addition of CO2 is going to help those plants grow faster. Therefore, they'll uptake those nutrients faster before the algae can attempt to utilize them. So algae inhibition is definitely a factor and definitely a bonus. There are some myths and misconceptions. Just adding CO2 to your tank won't kill off the algae. And in some cases, if you don't have healthy plants, feeding your tank a bunch of CO2 regardless is just going to cause additional algae problems. And this is a slide by Han Tran, who used to run Han's Aquatics. Now he runs, he still sells plants. He's just more into the terrestrial game right now, like Monsteras and a bunch of other stuff. Super good dude. If you ever see Han Tran around, make sure you say hi to him. Nice guy. Slide, please. So let's talk about equipment that you might need to run CO2 in a planted tank. We'll talk about kind of the various types of setups, such as DIY, like a do-it-yourself mixture versus a pressurized setup. the tank itself, you'll need a solenoid, a regulator, and then we'll talk about diffusion methods and how we can monitor the CO2 that we put into our tank. So there's a couple options. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the various options for DIY CO2. This could be called either DIY CO2 or a CO2 generator. This is generally some sort of container that you use like a citric acid mixture in, or back in the day, long time ago, we used simply yeast and sugar, and that basically fermented more or less and released CO2, which slowly trickled into our tank. Generally speaking, a DIY type setup, while we have, refined the mixtures using citric acid and various pieces of somewhat simple equipment, DIY will be, cheaper short term, but it can be, quite a bit of work. And if you don't stay on top of it, it can be pretty inconsistent. When it comes to CO2, inconsistent and fluctuating CO2 levels can lead to various algae problems. Now, a pressurized setup, such as you'd see with, your standard CO2 cylinder, you have a regulator which adjusts the high pressure that's in that CO2 cylinder down to a low working pressure. You'll have a solenoid, which is more or less an on-off valve that's electrically controlled to control when you're adding CO2 into that tank. This obviously is a set it and forget it type setup that you usually don't have to tweak much. Once you get it dialed in, it's going to give you that consistency to help you avoid algae and maximize your growth. And then cost versus effect. It depends on your goals. It's easy to spend a lot of money on a pressurized CO2 setup. However, like myself, I bought my CO2 setup that I use on my 125 planted display that you guys have seen my videos used in 2005. I think I paid $100 for it. And because of that extra growth, like Dennis Wong said, the 5 to 10 times increased growth rate, I'm able to grow plants quite quickly and sell them at swap meets, sell them online and ship them out, etc. And that pays for itself many, many times over. Talked about DIY. Geek Boy said he spilled a 2-liter of yeasty alcohol all over the carpet. It does smell. It gets bad. Citric acid is a little bit better. When I first got into CO2, I ran 3 2-liter bottles on a 29-gallon tank and changed them out. I changed one out a week, so I rotated them to try to keep my CO2 levels fairly consistent. And it was a little bit of work. So what do you need? So for a pressurized setup, what you'll need is a cylinder. Now, personally, myself, I think a 10-pound cylinder is a great compromise between, size and how much space it takes up. What size tank do you need? It kind of depends on how often you want to refill it and how much space you have. Now, I have a lot of space under my 125. A 10-pound tank fits under there just fine. You may have a small nano aquarium. You may only have like a 10-gallon tank. So that CO2, 10 pounds on a 10-gallon tank would probably last you a year or better. I know on my 125, I run, a fairly high level of CO2. 10 pounds will last me about 4 months. So that kind of gives you an idea of what size tank you may need. There's a lot of options out there. Some people you can use an old fire extinguisher. Some people use, a dedicated aluminum tank that you may find like for homebrew stuff or beverages. And aluminum versus steel as far as the cylinder itself. I have an aluminum tank because it looks nice, and but aluminum and steel, they both work just fine. And a lot of places that you can get it filled with CO2 include like beverage companies, welding shops, or gas shops. I get mine filled at a fire extinguisher servicing company. And Priscilla's got, that looks like probably a 5-pound tank there. I personally, I own my tank. So I bought a tank that I own. It's aluminum. It's shiny. It looks good. I've got some different stickers on it. So I have my tank filled. Most shops will give you the option to simply exchange it, where you take in your empty cylinder. They give you a completely different cylinder that's already full, and then you don't have to worry about anything. By owning a tank and just having it filled, you do have to worry about a hydro test every 5 years, and that costs about $30. So factor that into, kind of the operating cost, but $35 long term every 5 years, not really a big deal. A solenoid. So let's talk about a solenoid, and I should have one handy. I could run downstairs and grab one, or I can just show you guys a picture. So a solenoid is a small, like I said, an electronic valve that either opens or closes. And it's usually attached, it'll be attached to the regulator. Most people run it associated with a timer with their lights. And on that timer, you'll set the solenoid to open either when your lights come on or slightly before your lights come on to turn on the gas. So that's to allow the CO2 to go to your tank. At night, you shut that off. When the lights are on, plants are executing photosynthesis, so they're uptaking that CO2, and they end up pulling the carbon off of it and releasing O2 out into the atmosphere or into your tank's water column. At night, they kind of do the reverse, where they're releasing CO2 and absorbing a little bit of oxygen, not a ton. So at night, most people will use that solenoid on a timer to shut the CO2 off. Is it hurting the tank running it? Not particularly, but there's not really a need, so save it. Why should I run a solenoid? Some people ask, why should I run a solenoid? Some people use a solenoid to control pH. The more CO2 you inject into your tank, the lower your pH will fall as a result of the carbonic acid that results from that CO2 kind of mixing in with your water. So a solenoid attached to a pH controller, which is more or less just a probe in your tank that constantly monitors the pH. The solenoid attached to the controller will either turn the valve on or off, depending on where you want that pH level to be at. And we'll touch on that and the importance of it a little bit later in the presentation. You'll need a regulator. Now, I was talking about a solenoid. You can see the small silver cube in the center of this setup. The solenoid itself is just the black box under that. The regulator, as you can see in this image, this looks like, a Milwaukee MA957 type setup, which is pretty, it's been around for a while. It works. It's budget friendly. The left side, you'll see two gauges. The far left is your tank pressure. The right gauge will be your working pressure. And generally speaking, for most CO2 applications, the tank itself is normally around 1,000 psi, which is quite high pressure. That regulator is going to safely reduce that pressure down into the 30 to 40 psi range, which works well for most diffusers. And then on the right, you'll see a clear cylinder with a brass needle valve on the bottom. That's to fine tune how much CO2 is going into your tank. The airline will run out the top to your reactor or diffuser, whatever method you're using. And then usually the cylinder is just filled with water, and that it's referred to as a bubble counter, where the CO2 bubbles will actually flow through that, so you're able to count them to roughly gauge the amount of CO2 that's going into your tank. It's not a precise amount because obviously, bubble size can vary, etc. But it kind of gives you a visual representation so you can monitor it a little bit better. So let's talk about, we had the tank that stores the CO2, the regulator reduces the pressure down to something usable. The solenoid turns the CO2 on or off. The bubble counter we use for a visual reference as to how much CO2 we're adding to our tank. And then you have to diffuse it into the tank somehow, which just means to dissolve that CO2 into the water column so that your plants can uptake it and use it during photosynthesis. So a diffuser is generally a small glass pipe with like a ceramic disc, and you use that CO2 at about 30 to 40 psi, or a little bit less even sometimes, and it'll force its way through that ceramic disc and release micro bubbles directly into the water column, and those will float around the tank and slowly dissolve, allowing your plants to utilize that CO2. An atomizer is another method. It's quite similar to a diffuser. There are a whole lot of differences. Again, it's going to create a very fine mist. And then a reactor is my preference on most tanks over about 40 gallons. Diffusers work great. For smaller tanks, a reactor is going to be generally an external device. outside of your tank, usually plumbed in line with like a canister filter or a sump return line. And that will actually, you'll inject the CO2 into the reactor. You will create, some turbulence in that reactor. The CO2 bubbles will eventually dissolve in the reactor before that water goes to your tank. And this allows for 100% dissolution and far higher CO2 levels in a tank than most diffusers will offer. So if you're pushing, a lot of light, or you want to really run a little more intense CO2 levels, reactor is definitely the best bet. However, it does take up a little bit of space. So if you're running a smaller tank, an in-tank diffuser or an atomizer will work just fine. Now, there are other methods that some people may have seen, like a bell or like a glass bell that sits upside down in the tank, or like some people even use like a plastic bottle. They'll tip it upside down. I know there's a video that was kind of popular of a small shop out in California. And what they'll do is they'll fill this CO2 bell up in the morning and let the CO2 slowly passively diffuse into the water column. This isn't particularly efficient, and it's inconsistent. There's a lot of factors that go into how fast or slow that CO2 in the bell dissolves into the water column. So it's not a method that I recommend myself. It's also not a method that you can control if you have to go out of town. So like I said, that does lead to fluctuating CO2 levels and inconsistencies in CO2 diffusion. So it's not a method that I normally recommend. You'll also see, back in the day, you used to see CO2 ladders, which is basically just a piece of acrylic that would zigzag back and forth. The bubble would enter at the bottom, and as that bubble slowly zigzagged its way to the top, it would dissolve into the water column. Gonna skim. I see a couple comments and questions popping up. I'm gonna skim through them. I'm trying to move fairly quickly, so if I'm moving too quick, or if I miss something, say something, holler, or do something to get my attention. Groundtail asked, what's your take on CO2 bell so it has longer contact in water? That's what I just touched on. I don't personally recommend it. Like I said, there's a lot of factors, temperature, barometric pressure that come into play as to how fast that'll dissolve into your tank. So I personally don't recommend it. Is it a method that people have used? Yes, but it doesn't diffuse or dissolve CO2 into your tank particularly quick. Geek voiced it. That's how you know you're fairly old school, is if you have a ladder diffuser. Because I don't even know if they sell those anymore. Priscilla, do you know? Have you seen one at all?
No, I have not. Sorry, I muted myself so the bubble sound doesn't distract.
Oh, that's fine. I'm just cruising along right now. If you have anything to say, don't be afraid to chime in.
No, I'm just listening.
Geek Boy said he bought his first pressurized setup from your shop 15 years ago. That's about how long I've been into it too.
Well, the shop's been around for 36 years.
Mm-hmm. So I did initially in 2004-ish. I played the DIY game with the yeast and sugar. I noticed that there was, an improvement in my growth rate, and decided to make the jump to a pressurized setup. And it's well worth the money, in my opinion. If you want to just try CO2 and kind of, familiarize yourself with it, DIY CO2 can be super cheap to set up a 2-liter bottle or two. And if you look up one of the various citric acid formulas, or you can still use yeast and sugar, it's just not a particularly efficient method. It's a good way to mess around with it and kind of get your feet wet.
You should make a video on that. How to
do
DIY.
DIY. I haven't set up DIY myself in a long time, so it would probably be a decent little refresher. Does anyone use CO2 on Walstad tanks? So the idea of a Walstad tank is as little, outside input as possible. So I would say that if you are injecting CO2 into a Walstad type tank, then it's no longer a, roughly following, experiment as she outlined it in her book. I know Walstad method is kind of a buzzword in the community a little bit. It's not a method that I personally recommend. That being said, like I said, if you are injecting CO2 into what was a Walstad method tank, I no longer see it as Walstad myself. Just my 2 cents. Fishganic. So since CO2 becomes carbonic acid when it interacts with water, what's the limitation with just adding carbonic acid into a tank? On that note, I would say, is it possible? Yes, you'd have inconsistencies. You might be able to go that route. I think it would be a little more expensive if you had like an auto doser or like a peristaltic pump type setup where it was constantly pumping it into the tank at a specified rate. But pressurized setups are it's kind of been the standard method for so long that I don't really see a reason to try to mess with anything else. And while I have somewhat of a chemistry background, I am not a chemist by any means. So I'm sure if it was a more viable method, somebody out there would do it, but nobody's doing it, and there must be good reasons. S said, I'm just wondering what it would do for the plants. I guess the obvious answer is more growth. Yep, so more growth, faster nutrient uptake, etc. So I mean, despite it being like a Walstad style tank, its CO2 will still have the same effect regardless. Like Bruno said, kind of echoing fluctuations and inconsistencies. So we talked about diffusion methods, how to get it into your tank. Let's talk about a couple ways that we monitor how much CO2 is in our tank. A drop checker is generally, as you can see in the picture, a small glass ball that sits in your tank. It has usually a 4-DKH solution mixed into it, and that solution will change color. It's a pH reagent, more or less, so the solution changes color based on roughly how much CO2 is dissolved in the water. Now, a drop checker is a cheap tool, and it's an easy visual tool, but it's not particularly accurate. There are variables to it, and it is a little bit of a lag instrument. So if you inject CO2 into your tank, your lights come on at 8 o'clock, your CO2 comes on, 7 o'clock, an hour early, whatever. That drop checker may not indicate your actual CO2 level for several hours throughout the day. So drop checker is an option, like I said, for the $10 that most of them cost, unless you're looking at like a GLA makes some super fancy, weird, awesome looking drop checkers that can run you a lot of money. But for $10, it's an easy visual indicator. So you walk by the tank, you eyeball it, say, yep, it's roughly my target value, which is we'll get to it later, but 30 ppm is about kind of the accepted target in most planted tanks. You can also monitor by pH, like I said, a pH controller, or even just a pH monitor using a pH probe. As far as visual notes, there are more key things that I could go into detail about. The point of this presentation is just to give you kind of a brief overview. There are visual notes that you can see. Certain plants like Ludwigia Ludwigia inclinata, the Pantanol variety, which you can see in the top of the background image. It's that red plant that kind of looks like a mum, I guess. The plants will actually, the leaves of Pantanol will droop down with low CO2 levels, and then they'll open back up when they hit, kind of more desirable CO2 levels. So a lot of people can use Pantanol as like an indicator plant. There's some other visual notes that you can see. If your fish are gasping, that's not always a sign that there's too much CO2. There could be too little O2. And a lot of times people, think that those are directly related, but an increase in CO2 doesn't necessarily mean a decrease in O2. So don't get stuck on that. Myrtle asks, Crown to asked if I can make the pictures bigger. Yep, I can make them a little bit bigger. I'll hide my ugly mug.
So I've never used one of those drop checkers. How often do you have to change the liquid in it?
I would say once a month. I don't use one anymore. Like I said, with experience, with time comes experience. With experience comes the ability to just kind of look at your tank and have a better idea what's going on. So I don't personally run one. I would probably change it roughly once a month. Sand drop checkers can be difficult to use if you black out the back of your tank. Yep, I agree with that. Thanks, John Oliver, for the shout out. Angus asked how much CO2 he needs to calm his flower horn down. I don't know if calming a flower horn down is a thing. That's the way they're bred, so good luck. Ames, what's up, Ames? Thanks for stopping by. But I can't stay awake. Love y'all. All right, Ames, we'll see you in the replay. Thanks for stopping by. And I'll drop some useful links and stuff in the video description as well for you to check out. Geek Boy said he's falling asleep in class. If I'm that boring, we can try to mix it up. Slide. So let's talk about how we set up CO2 in a planted aquarium. This used to be this was a 27-gallon bow front that my buddy set up, and he had some T5HO lights on it, a little 5-pound pressurized setup. And as you can see, he's got quite a variety of plants tucked into this little tank, looking pretty good. So we talked about the equipment we need. We talked about how we are going to get the CO2 from the cylinder or from your DIY container or your generator. We talked about the diffusion methods, whether you use a reactor or a diffuser, inline atomizer, etc. But how much CO2 are we trying to get into the tank? Now, generally speaking, the accepted range for a target CO2 level is approximately 25 to 30 parts per million. And this can be hard to dial in. Like I said, drop checkers kind of get you close, but they can be, like I said, they are a lag instrument. They're not super precise. There is this the chart here where you test your pH, you compare it to your DKH, and somewhere in between, you find out where those meet up, and that's roughly your CO2 level in your water column. Well, it's not necessarily wrong. It's a little bit of an older method. It is a little bit outdated anymore. Most people now use like a pH drop method of measuring the CO2 levels in your tank. And this does vary based on your actual water hardness, your DKH. But generally speaking, from the time your CO2 comes on to midday, you want your pH to drop approximately 1 point. So a 1.0 drop in pH throughout the day is roughly a pretty good indicator that you're hitting about 30 parts per million. Some people push that a little bit more and they'll go to 1.2. I would say, obviously start small, work your way up. Additional considerations, do I need CO2? Well, even if you're running, obviously a higher light tank generally, pushes a little bit more of a necessity, but you're more likely to want CO2 on a higher light tank. That being said, like I said earlier, when you have an aquarium, so those plants that are used to being immersed out in the wild, so out of the water, they have access to atmospheric CO2 levels. Again, approximately 400 parts per million. You put them underwater, most aquariums sit between 4 and 5 parts per million. That's a drastic decrease. They need that CO2. It's part of the photosynthesis process. So to speed things up, even in a low light tank, to get healthier plants, better growth, you're going to inject CO2. Nutrients. So more CO2, like I said, so light's kind of the gas pedal, CO2 is the air, nutrients are the fuel. So the more light you push, those plants are going to want to uptake more nutrients. So you add CO2 to that. So you have your light, you have your CO2, nutrients then become your limiting factor. And actually, it's a common misconception that, algae is often caused by an excess of nutrients. In a planted tank, I've actually, generally found the opposite, that a lot of algae rears its head when you have a nutrient deficiency, often with phosphates. There are, some other specific nutrients that some people can have seen algae grow as a pop-up of a deficiency as opposed to an excess. So if you are running a lot of light, you add your CO2, now nutrients can be your lymphatic and you may see some algae growth. John said he's learning a lot. Appreciate you stopping by. Thanks for the kind words. An Old Navy dive table. Yep, it's pretty close. Tony Danford asked, when you say, so we'll jump back a slide here. He asked about a pH drop. So your pH by 1 point, you mean if you start with an 8.0 pH, it will drop to a 7.0 pH. That's generally your goal. So you want to, by the middle of your photo period, so once your plants have been executing photosynthesis, your lights are on, your CO2 is running, you want to see a drop of approximately 1.0. So 8.0 to 7.0 is correct. So as opposed to, so not a 0.1 pH drop, but a 1.0. And then we can talk about, so we talked about light. And here we can kind of see a chart here where there's it's not necessarily such a linear curve as opposed to kind of parabolic, I suppose. But you can see the exponential increase in plant growth as a result of, CO2 injection as well as running higher light. Just a quick graphic for you nerdy visual types. We talked about nutrients. So to avoid a nutrient deficiency or a nutrient imbalance, I personally, I use the estimated index to dose dry salts. Now I use dry salts for various reasons. One being it's extremely cheap. I can run my 125-gallon planted display tank with CO2 using dry ferts for about a year and a half for about $20. So what a dry ferts are is you'll mix several dry salts to achieve a desired nutrient level in your aquarium. So these include nitrates, phosphates, sulfates, and then your micros like your trace elements. That includes, magnesium, molybdenum, boron, iron, stuff like that. Another option, instead of dosing dry salts, is to dose liquid fertilizers. So your liquid fertilizers are stuff like, Seachem has their Flourish line, which is super common. Most stores sell it. I don't personally recommend it because the Flourish line is actually quite overpriced and very diluted and an incomplete fertilizer. Something that I usually suggest is Thrive by Algae. It's a very powerful fertilizer. It's based on roughly the nutrient content that you aim to achieve using an estimated index type dosing regime. It's super affordable. Colin's an awesome guy. It's probably one of two or three fertilizers that I would call complete all-in-ones, meaning you dose that one bottle and you're good to go. There are some other fertilizers. Tropica is not too bad. Again, I think it's a little overpriced. ADA has a liquid line. Again, overpriced, but that's kind of the name of the game when you're buying ADA stuff. Skim some questions real quick. Tony asks, so this would be a plant holding tank because that would be rough on fish for the pH to fluctuate that much. Actually, no. So even in the wild, we see these same CO2 fluctuations in natural bodies of water. So people tend to overhype pH a bit much, in my opinion. pH and a 1.0 pH swing really isn't that big of a deal. If you lose fish while injecting CO2, generally speaking, it's not because of a swing in pH. So all my planted tanks have fish in them, and I stock them quite heavily with fish. A lot of the times, the tanks you don't see a ton of fish in, often you'll see like the IAPLCs, the International Aquatic Plant Landscape Layout Contest. Generally speaking, those tanks aren't really running for more than 4 to 6 months, so they'll usually only put a few fish in there. Groundtail, definitely learning a lot. Some of these, if you can use snippets for easier knowledge, etc. Also, what's runtime for CO2 or as same as the light cycle? Yeah, I can definitely, like I said, this stream is to get your interest and kind of get your brain thinking a little bit about CO2, not so much to go into the specifics. I will make individual videos to kind of go into specifics like Priscilla and I talked about. I'll make a video dedicated to how you would do a DIY setup, and I'll walk you through, the equipment that you need and the actual mixture and how that process goes. Same with a pressurized setup. So I'll break that down for you. As far as runtime for CO2, most people run theirs on the same timer as their lights. So the lights come on, CO2 comes on, lights go up, CO2 goes out. Another option to optimize your CO2 levels is to turn your CO2 on about an hour before your lights come on. Now what this does is allows that CO2 to saturate the water column, allowing your plants instant access to that target of about 25 to 30 parts per million as soon as the lights go on when they start photosynthesis. Bob Miller's asked, do you plant crypts in soil or attach it to wood rocks? Definitely plant it in the substrate. George asked, where's a good place to buy dry fertilizers for a planted aquarium? And, Colin is kind of my go-to. I've been buying stuff from Colin for quite some time. So I'll get you the link to go over there. And if you're interested, there you go. Drop the link for Colin. And I can show you the specific packages that I use. So he offers a lot of different options. I use the estimated index NPK CSM plus B pack, which I'll drop in this link. Again, for about $20, figure shipping, I can run a 125-gallon tank for quite some time. That's literally the link I just dropped is the picture that's on the screen now. George said he runs his CO2 24/7 on his 120. Yep, that's just fine. A lot of people do. No problem at all. I mean, there's not really a particular downside to it. Like I said, plants just don't use it at night, so it's not really necessary. Some people don't want that pH swing, which even if you leave the CO2 on the whole time, you will see a little pH swing just because the plants aren't uptaking it, so there will be a little more in the water column. So Tony mentioned it's interesting because a lot of people on the internet and YouTube talk about just having a consistency in your pH to keep fish in a healthy environment. Yes, and I am a proponent of consistency regardless of what you're talking about. However, when you're just looking at a 1.0 swing throughout the day as a result of CO2, you're just fine. When I think of inconsistency in pH levels, what I'm thinking is if people are using like pH up, pH down, if they're adding a bunch of tannins or chemicals in their water and then doing a large water change after a while. So those potential big swings or inconsistent swings is as a result of adding chemicals to your tank. Look forward to in-depths. Yep, you bet. Happy to help. Again, more chit chat, kind of about what we've been talking about. So if you have any questions, don't be afraid to ask. We'll keep rolling through here. So let's talk about liquid CO2 or liquid carbon. And I think Deborah, when we first started talking, asked a question about liquid carbon. Almost there. So Deborah Lewis said, you mentioned carbon, like liquid carbon. So I will mainly talk about Flourish XL because this is the one that you mostly see on the market, and the majority of the liquid CO2 are the products that are mismarketed or misunderstood as liquid CO2 or liquid carbon are generally a glutaraldehyde solution. This includes Flourish XL. This includes Aquarium Co-op's Easy Carbon, but it is a glutaraldehyde solution. And while it sometimes, like CChem, in Flourish XL's description, it says it's an organic source of bioavailable carbon. So glutaraldehyde is actually a compound that's used as a biocide to cold sterilize medical equipment. Now it does so. The compound cross-links proteins, causing both immediate and long-term damage, tissue damage in both plants and animals. So glutaraldehyde solution, like Excel, is it diluted? Yes. Does CChem try to get around the fact that glutaraldehyde itself is, I believe, banned in use in aquarium products in most of Europe? Yes, they call it various isomers to say that it's not glute, but regardless of whatever isomer you call it, it's still more or less a glutaraldehyde compound. So CChem claims, and they try to show you science, that at the end of the day, glute breaks down and offers a little bit of carbon to your plants. To be honest, glutaraldehyde has a half-life of about 12 hours. So once you dump this in your tank, in 12 hours or less, the glute has already done its damage to your plants and fish, all while adding, a negligible, if any, most likely not any, amount of usable carbon or CO2 to your plants. What people see sometimes is like, well, I use Excel in my tank and it helps. Well, you're putting a biocide in your tank, even if it's considered a mild biocide, just because it's a weak solution. What happens is that glutaraldehyde attacks the algae, or it has an effect on the algae first. So it acts as an algicide. So it may kill off the algae in your tank, which theoretically, by killing off the algae, it would allow plants less competition for the nutrients in the water column. Unfortunately, like I said, glutaraldehyde is not selective for algae. It causes tissue damage in plants and animals. So it also damages the tissue in all plants. In some plants, it just has more severe effects. These will be species like your Vallisneria, some of your cryptocoryns. So when people talk about their plants melting because they added Excel, that's because the glutaraldehyde is literally just destroying the plant tissue itself. So not a product that I ever suggest, and it definitely does not provide any noticeable or usable source of carbon or CO2. Tony Danford never touched a research CO2 system. That's the point of LIVESTREAM. It's not to tell you everything you need to know, but it is to get your interest, and hopefully, maybe you were a little daunted. The information can seem really complicated, and it can seem a bit scary at first. Hopefully, I can kind of show you that it's not so bad after all. That's to ask, what makes fish not like CO2? Is it too much and they are being poisoned? It can be. It takes pretty high levels of CO2 to actually poison your fish. And generally speaking, I think people more so run into a problem. Can you gas your fish with CO2? If you have an efficient diffusion method, whether it's a reactor or whatever, and very low surface agitation, yes, just you can limit the gas exchange so you're not getting oxygen in the tank, which can cause problems with fish and respiration. There is a misconception that you don't want surface agitation, you don't want to run sumps, you don't want to run air stones if you have CO2, because then you're off-gassing your CO2. Are you off-gassing some CO2? Yes. Is it a noticeable amount? Not particularly. Don't be afraid to run an air stone, to run a spray bar near the surface, to run a hang-on back filter, or to run a sump, because you're worried about losing CO2. You're not going to lose enough to have to worry about it. And the increased surface agitation actually keeps your oxygen levels up while being able to maximize your CO2 levels. And Fish Guy Nick said, too much CO2 means less O2 dissolved in the water, making it hard for them to breathe. Yep, it does, and it can. So we'll talk about that when we talk about tuning CO2 and kind of fine tuning things a little bit more. I said, I feel like if you buy one of these fancy plants, I'm just going to kill it. Most plants can grow without CO2 supplementation. And plants, unlike fish, are easy to replace most of the time. Deborah Lewis kind of echoed what I was talking about with Excel. She said she had some valves, which is one of the species I mentioned, and it definitely damaged them and took a while to come back. So we will press. So let's talk about your ROI when you purchase a CO2 setup. Again, this is another picture of that tank from the very beginning by Tom Barr. Beautiful tank, excellently scaped, wide variety of species. There's probably 45 species in that tank. Looks great. Tom's good at what he does. If you're ever looking for information on Planet Tanks, check out the Barr report. It's all Tom stuff. Super good stuff. So we'll talk about initial costs, long-term costs, and the benefits outweigh the costs, which is a matter of opinion, really. Some people have bigger budgets, some people don't. That's okay. Slide. Oops. So initial costs, like I said, CO2, if you're just going with a DIY setup, you can set up DIY CO2 on a small tank for 20 or 30 bucks. Pretty cheap. Easy way to get into it. Like I said, with DIY, you have smaller initial costs, but you do have to stay on top of it. The labor is going to be a little more intensive in order to, maintain consistency and optimize the effects of that CO2. Excuse me. A pressurized setup can run you anywhere from, if you look used, you can get quality used equipment, like saltwater guys that run, carbon reactors, or calcium reactors, they'll run CO2 so that a lot of the times when they get out, they'll sell the CO2 setup cheap. I personally paid $100 for my tank and the regulator with the solenoid used in 2005. If you look around, you can still find pretty good deals on used stuff. A diffuser, if you're using just a ceramic disc diffuser, it's going to run about $10-15. An atomizer will run you a little bit more. And then I personally run a Rex Griggs style reactor, which is basically just a PVC pipe. Costs about $15 and maybe 20 minutes to build. There are powered reactors that can run, up to $100. Colin offers a couple different reactors that he builds himself, and they're excellent pieces of equipment. And those run, $50 to $100. So if you were to buy a new regulator for a good price, I would spend, there are some cheap options out there, but the longevity is in question. I would spend about $150 on a new regulator, and that'll come with your solenoid, generally come with a bottle counter. Tank, you can get into like an exchange program at your local gas shop or something. Otherwise, a new tank's going to run you $50 to $75. So plan if you want a pressurized setup, I would say $200 to $250 if you're buying stuff new, will get you going just fine. If you're buying fancy equipment, you can get a nice GLA regulator that's all stainless and spend $300 or $400 on it. But that's not necessary. There are a couple people out there building custom regulators that do a great job as well. So long-term costs. So DIY, your long-term cost is going to be your time, because it's going to be a little bit extra work to make sure you stay on top of your mixtures. And then you're constantly having to buy like a citric acid type formula or whatever you're using. So it's smaller cost each time, but my time's worth something, and so is my effort, and that can be a headache to mix all the time. My pressurized setup, long-term, like I said, my regulator solenoid, no maintenance problems, and I've been running them every day for 15 years, so no costs for maintenance on that. For the CO2 itself, like I said, I own my tank, so every 5 years I pay about $30 for the hydro test, and then it costs me $15 to $20 every 4 months to fill it. Like I said, that's a 10-pound tank on a 125-gallon aquarium, pushing quite a bit of CO2, and I get 4 to 6 months out of it. If you run less CO2, obviously that'll last longer. Like I said, if you have a 10-gallon aquarium and a 10-pound CO2 cylinder, you'll probably get a year and a half out of it and like I said, here personally, like it depends where you go, but I spend about $15 or $20 to fill it. There are some budget options you can use. They do make regulators, and for little paintball tanks, like your 20-ounce paintball tanks that you would use, obviously you're going to pay $6 to $9 to fill those little like 20-ounce or whatever they are. but you're going to have to fill them more often. So that means more trips to the store. For what you're getting, you're paying more. I mean, most of the cost of a fill is labor. CO2 itself is fairly cheap usually. So when people ask, what the long-term costs are, the $30. So on my 125, $30 every 5 years, and about $20 every 4 months. And because of that 5 to 10 times increase in growth rate, I sell roughly, just trimming my plants. So I don't buy farm plants and sell them to people. I sell trimmings out of my tank. So if you buy something from me, or if you get plants from me, that is cut with that day that I ship it out. I snip it out of my tank as it grows and ship that to you. You can easily make, just doing that with one tank, you can easily make $200, $300 a month, which is paying for your CO2 costs. So long-term costs, there's potential to definitely not only cover your costs, but make a couple bucks back. Do the benefits outweigh the costs? That's a matter of opinion. If you're doing DIY, is the extra work worth, the potential improvement that you're getting? Are you able to grow, more interesting plants, or your plants look better by running a pressurized setup, even if you're not selling stuff? Again, that's up to you. I personally, I'm a plant geek. I think it's worth it. You may or may not think so. The pound bugs, blood, sweat, and tears going to the plants you buy from me. If you watch my last video I posted about maintenance on the 125, you can see there's not a ton of blood, sweat, and tears that go into that tank. It's pretty well about on track now. I do need to rescape it, but I spend about 30 minutes a week, doing water change and maintaining that tank. And a lot of people think, well, higher light, higher CO2, more nutrients, means more maintenance. But my planted tank isn't really any more maintenance than any other tank. Like I said, that's a 125, so it's fairly good size. And I did a 35-gallon water change, trimmed some plants, added ferts in about 30 minutes the other day. Closing statements. So we talked about why you'd want to run CO2, what you can accomplish with CO2, what you need to set up CO2, how you get CO2 from the cylinder or your generator into the tank, how you measure it, how you control it, some other, considerations when, considering running CO2 in the tank. We hit some questions along the way. I've been yakking about it for about an hour now. But if you guys have any other questions, if you want to get down into, some more details on any specific topic, the official 1 hour CO2 talk is complete. And like I said, that's kind of a broad overview. That's not so that you can walk away from this being an expert. That's, hey, this isn't that bad. This isn't as complicated as it seems. If there's anything you want me to go back over, let me know, and I'll jump back through the slides so you can take a look. If you're sick of hearing me ramble about plants, we can talk about something else. So that's my little 1 hour rundown on CO2. What you guys got? Let's we'll open it up to a little bit of chat. You can see Priscilla is drawing a little something over there. What are you working on tonight?
Sorry, I almost forgot I was here still because I was just listening. I'm drawing a pistol.
Oh, cool. What kind?
McMasterite.
McMasterite. Good choice. Appreciate the presentation. Happy to help, guys. Hopefully you guys found it worthwhile and found something interesting out of it. Deborah asked for a hands-on setup and explanation would be nice. Learned a lot. I'm glad you did. And that's the purpose. The purpose is to give you kind of that broad understanding of, okay, I've seen people talk about CO2 in a tank. This is the point of this is to give you, that quick, the CO2 101. And for setting stuff up, definitely, I can tear down my CO2 setup and I'll set it up. We can build a reactor. We can set up, a DIY setup. Not opposed to any of that, and can definitely make that happen and talk about some of the finer points along the way.
Oh, you're offering now your plants on Get Gills, right?
Yeah. So there's not a lot on there, and unfortunately for you guys and the rest of the internet world, I am going to a swap meet on Sunday, so a lot of the stuff I'm trimming will actually be sold at the swap meet locally, as opposed to be online. But there are some things that you'll see online. I've been shipping out, maybe 2 orders a week lately. And, like I said in the presentation, you add CO2 to your tank, the same plant, you'll see, up to a 10 times increase in the growth. Like myself, in my tank, I can literally put inches of growth on a stem in a week. Some people will post pictures of their tanks 6 months apart, and you can barely tell anything grew. I can literally put 3-4 inches on a single stem in a week without a problem. So obviously, if you want to make a couple extra bucks, everybody's like breeding for profit this or plants for profit. If you're going to try a plants for profit system, I would advise against trying to go and flip wholesale stuff out of your basement and just grow your own. So Fish Guy Nick said, "What's the name of that plant I asked about Friday? Had like balsamic in the name." That is Hygrophila balsamica. And I can show you that guy again. I don't know if I've got some pictures on my phone. Have you kept Hygrophila balsamica before, Priscilla?
Nope.
Nope. So this is...
Wait, didn't you send me some?
I don't think so. Not yet. Oops. Stop screen.
Oh, you sent me a Hygrophila.
So this is Hygrophila balsamica.
Mm.
It has kind of, if you've ever kept like a limnophila, sessiflora, or heterophylla, it kind of has that appearance, but has a thick stem, doesn't grow quite so crazy, much more compact and bushy. So Fish Guy Nick, Hygrophila balsamica. And this is a plant that just kind of came into the hobby the past, year or two, I think. So it's fairly new. It's not super hard to keep. I do keep it with CO2. I believe you could grow it without CO2 though and be okay. Angus asked about Echinodurus socarno. I'm not sure if Echinodurus socarno is another a little bit newer variant in the hobby. See if I can find a good picture. This guy this is kind of what Echinodurus socarno looks like. The leaves on mine stay a little bit thinner, and it's not, Amazon swords get gigantic, and Echinodurus socarno will stay roughly about 16 to 18 inches, so it's a lot more manageable. It is a fairly fast grower. It displays awesome red coloration. I mean, one of my favorite swords. There's a ton of swords out there, but socarno is probably one of my favorites just because of the coloration. And the ones that are on, I do have some available on Get Gills. They're probably between 6 and 8 inches in height, and maybe 5 or 6 leaves on them. So, Hygrophila deformis variegated looks pretty cool. Yep, I have. I don't know if that's on my Get Gills. If you've ever seen just water wisteria, it's the same plant, just a variant that displays, some white coloration along kind of the veins of the plant. So again, super prolific, grows very fast. I don't have a picture online right now. Looks like this. That's pretty close to what it looks like. And the variegation, so that white color is, from my experience, a lot more prominent with reduced nitrates in the aquarium. So the lower my nitrates go, the higher I drive my lights, I'll get more of that white coloration instead of the dark green. Angus said 18 inches on the Sukarno. Yep, and that's one of the reasons I like it. A lot of the swords, like your melons, obviously your Amazon, those things will outgrow a 2-foot tall tank, no problem. But this sword stays a little bit smaller, much more manageable. It's more prolific than some of the other swords, and it'll send off spikes with daughter plants. I've had it flower. Flower's pretty easy. So nice little sword for sure. Local pet store in Montgomery has Sukarno for $15. That sounds pretty close. I think I got them. I'm not sure where I've got them priced at, but they aren't particularly common. So if your local shop is selling them, that's pretty impressive because you don't even see them for sale online that often. Any other questions on CO2? If not, we'll move into something that might be a little more exciting for some folks.
How are your tanks been?
They're getting better. They're getting better. I don't have a bunch set up right now, but they are improving. The 125 is pretty much not self-sustaining right now, but it's consistent.
Is it back on track? You maybe should tell people what happened to it.
I'd say it's fairly well on track. Now, so as you guys know, I went to Guam for 2 months, and the tank kind of didn't do so well, which is just fine. Things happen. I have some progress pictures of it. Let me dig for a minute. And we'll get there. But in about a month, I was able to get it back online. Okay.
So all the plants I got from you are in a 40 breeder that has no CO2, and they're all adjusting pretty well.
Good. Yeah, and I think you'll find that most plants can be grown without CO2. There are some that I personally have not been able to grow without CO2, so it definitely happens sometimes. So I'll show you. Hopefully this is the right page. If not, we're going to see something funky. So this is the tank in middle of February. So this is 125. You can see it's not looking so hot. Kind of rough shape. And this was after adding some new plants from a friend. So, not looking great. Fortunately enough, after about a month, it looked like this. So pretty dramatic change just over the course of a month. With good maintenance, manually removing any algae, removing any, dead or dying plants, rotting leaves, etc. CO2, some good water changes, and some nutrients. You'll definitely, like I said, I think a month's growth, that's not too bad. So I've got in this picture, I had about 55 species. I'm up over 60 species in the tank now. And it's a little bit of a mess. Looks like when I tried to use Excel to take out algae. Yeah, so if you thought you wanted to use Excel in your tank, be careful.
Or just don't.
I agree. Don't. That's my opinion. Don't. And Excel is not the only product that's a glue solution. Most of them, I believe, they actually have to tell you if there's gluten in it just because of the dangers of it. And don't be fooled by some of the marketing, whether it be in the name or some of the poor marketing descriptions.
So branding.
and I'm not going to dog on any company, but just know. So if you look at, so we'll talk about kind of liquid carbon supplements for a minute. So this product is called Easy Carbon, but it doesn't say that it gives your plants carbon. It says that it's a liquid algae inhibitor. So this is kind of an example of a little bit of a misleading name, if you ask me. And then down here, there used to be, I can't get it to work right now. I know there used to be kind of a bit of a disclaimer on it. I don't see it at this moment. Anyway, so yeah, and there's other products out there. Like if you look at Excel, if you look at the MSDS, it says it's an isomer of glutaraldehyde. It's still glutaraldehyde. But if you look at their marketing here, let's see. So it says it's a source of bioavailable organic carbon. Well, there's some carbon in the glutaraldehyde compound. However, not necessarily usable for your plants. And it doesn't tell you that it's going to nuke some of your plants. So good luck with that. Have fun. CChem's been making millions easily. I bet they've made millions of dollars selling Excel, which is silly. There's actually a study out there that I saw. I'd have to dig pretty good to find the article. But there was a control group of plants grown compared to a group of plants that was exposed to glutaraldehyde, and the plants exposed to glutaraldehyde showed inhibited growth compared to those in the control group not exposed to glute. So take it for what it's worth. S asked is with CO2 dosing with ferts. Is ferts mandatory with CO2 dosing? So it depends, right? Kind of depends on what plants you have. I would definitely suggest it. And you can go with, you don't have to, dry ferts can be a little bit more complicated just because you do have to do a little bit of work and you have to do some measuring. But it's really not too bad. But you can go with something like Thrive by Colin. And he has, various options based on your tank's goals and water parameters. Pretty affordable. But Thrive All-in-One is kind of the generic one. Thrive C is kind of the low tech. So generally speaking, in the world of planted tanks, unfortunately, there's this divide in planted tanks that's just kind of become accepted over the years of low tech versus high tech. And the idea is that the defining point in a low-tech tank is that it does not have CO2 injection, and that once you add CO2 injection, your tank now becomes high-tech. I don't agree with that terminology. I like the terms low energy and high energy because you can have a tank with a plain light and dirt, but because you have CO2 in it, it's automatically called high-tech. But you can have a plant that does not use CO2, but you have fancy aqua soil, super fancy LED lights with timers and fancy, ramp ups and ramp downs, whatever. And you can have auto pumps on auto dosers and everything, but that's called low tech. So I like high energy and low energy. I would say even if you're running lower light, if you're dosing CO2, there will be, a little bit more demand for nutrients. So monitor your nutrient levels, and you may find that you need to add some nutrients. And that's where I'd personally suggest Thrive. It's a great starting point. It's extremely affordable and it works extremely well.
And if you have shrimp, you can use Thrive S.
That's cool. Thanks. That's what I was thinking. But I was thinking back to the Walstad tank and wondering if that tank nutrients might be enough. So I'm not gonna say Walstad tank. I think generally would say So even if you have an extremely nutrient-rich substrate, say you played the loose soil capped with sand, gravel, whatever, the substrate has a bunch of nutrients, but the CO2 will cause the plants to remove nutrients or uptake nutrients out of the soil faster. So yes, I definitely still suggest using a water column type fertilizer scheme. Fish Guy Nick said he likes Thrive S, and if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure Fish Guy Nick won some Thrive S when Colin over at Nylock. He donated a couple bottles for us to give away. So I'm glad it's working great for you, Nick. That is great to hear. And Colin's not a sponsor of any sort. He's just a super good dude. Nylock G has been definitely pushing the hobby forward and helping hobbyists out for a long time. So go show them. Check them out. Colin's on Facebook. Nylock G Aquatics has a Facebook group. Colin does offer the Prism Light. There is a Prism LED Q&A group if you have any questions. So just check him out. It's worth a shot. He posts. He has got a lot of information on his website too. All sorts of low tech. Again, the definition. I don't agree with the definition, but. And before I forget, a lot of this information that I found here can be found. So I showed you guys one of Dennis Wong's tanks, and again, he's a pretty well-known, a big name in the planted scene right now. Check out his website when you have time. There's a ton of stuff to learn over there. And I'll just kind of give you a quick glimpse. It's called the 2-Hour Aquarist. So 2houraquarist.com, or you can, if you use advancedplantedtank.com, that'll get you there. But he has all kinds of topics. So we're talking about CO2 today. So let's look at CO2. He's got diffusion methods, where he goes in here and he talks about diffusers. We talked about that. He talks about how to optimize the use of a diffuser. So a diffuser is going to create micro bubbles in the tank. Well, Dennis points out that in order to optimize those micro bubbles, give them the most amount of time in the tank, that you should have a circular flow, or technically this almost looks, so a circular flow through the tank where the water's flowing down where the diffuser is to push those bubbles back down into the water column so they have longer time in the column to dissolve. Then let's see, he talks about CO2 system 101, beginners. So look, he talks about all the things we talked about: regulator, solenoid, cylinder, inline atomizer, or an in-tank atomizer. Fancy stuff, nothing too crazy. He breaks it down, tells you how to set it up. 1.0 pH drop. I showed you guys that pH gauge chart. Look, there's that. A little bit on reading that and why you should or should not use it. Some stuff about lighting. So a lot of good options there. So check out his website. I did pull some information, some graphics from Dennis for this discussion. So I gave you a little teaser. Go check out Dennis's website, the 2-Hour Aquarist, for more information. Fish Guy Nick said he's out. If you want to stay, so okay, it's the bottom of the hour. Before you leave, Nick, stick with me. We'll give away some plants. If Nick's here.
Plants. Free plant?
Free plants. Doesn't cost you anything. So all 15 fish plant nerds that are here. Let's see if Nick's still here. My chat's all goofed. Did Nick bail out? Deborah said she's going to rewatch this tomorrow. Yeah. Myrtle brought up, I didn't see the sublight idea. 2 birds, 1 stone. Deborah or Myrtle, if you can if you can elaborate on your sump idea, I didn't see it. So let's hear what you got. I'm curious. Always curious. But anyway, so there's 15 of us here. Nick may or may not be around. He might have bounced already. I know when I say that I'm leaving, I usually send the message and escape out of there before somebody drags me back into a conversation. But I'll give away some plants, and I'll try to cater it a little bit to your tank. Yeah, so if you don't have CO2, even though I try to convince you tonight, if you don't have CO2, I'll send you stuff that should do fine without CO2. Because I don't want to send you some free stuff and you get excited about it and then you just struggle with it. So I'll send you some plants that you should have good luck with. And we'll pick a number between 1 and 50. And whoever gets closest without going over, we'll win a plant package somewhat catered to your tank. We'll see what we can do. So go ahead and everybody enters once. And if there is a duplicate, whoever chose that number first will be selected. If there's not a duplicate and we have a tie of some sort somehow, we'll do a runoff. So go ahead and start. Throw your numbers down.
Yeah, type start. Wait, I'll do it.
Don't tell me how to run this show. Sabrina said, in the meantime, CO2 24/7 tanks that have some sun, some are on the opposite light cycle. Yeah, that's a pretty cool idea. I know some reef people do that with their refugium. So I don't personally do it. No problem doing it though. Yeah, definitely a good way to optimize your plant growth, like if you're farming stuff. 24 for Kobe. R.I.P.
There's so many 24s.
My fish tank said 24. S said 24. Priscilla said 24. Angus said 24. You know, there's
I said 24 because my birthday is on the 24th.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll give it in a minute here, and then we'll see who wins. Riddle's running the show over here, picking numbers.
He's keeping people in check.
Somebody's got to do it. It's not me.
It's not me either.
All right. Bottom rollers. Angus picked 33. All right. Anybody else want to throw their name in the hat? We lost Nick. Sorry, Nick. A minute too late. If you could have just stayed awake a little bit longer. I don't see any new numbers rolling in. Say stop. And then, so I'm only going to click. It's just the Google random number generator. And I am going to click it one time. Exactly one time. No more than one time. And we'll see who the winner is. All right. So make sure I can see stuff. All right, I'm gonna click the button once, and we'll see what happens. 1, 2, 3, 43. John Oliver and Deborah said 37. Anthony said 36. Not tonight, bud. You're close, though. 33, 33, 24, 36. So I got John Oliver and Deborah Lewis in at 37. All right. So John and Deborah will go between 1 and 10. And we will settle this between the two of you. So I'll wait for Deborah and John to both throw a number down, and then we'll smash it and see We're going to make somebody really happy, and somebody's not going to be very happy and probably bail out of here. We could just have them fight. We'll just
fight?
Royal Rumble. Go down. All right, so Deborah's in at 7. John's in at 4. Again, we'll hit the number once, only once. And here we go. Number 7.
Ooh, right on it.
Deborah Lewis, congratulations. So Deborah, I will have you email me. Uh-oh, my video froze. Deborah, if you could email me, mike.allthingsfish@gmail.com, and we will get you some plants going your direction. I don't know what's going on with my video over here. Let's see. I'm broken.
You're broken? Oh, you're frozen.
Nobody needs to see that ugly mug.
I was like, what do you mean you're broken? Is that something new?
Nobody wants that. Congrats, Deborah. Again, we said either find me on Facebook. I will mike.allthingsfish@gmail. I'll see if I can try to fix this quick. So you opened Google, it takes over everything. Yeah, damn it, Google. That'll teach me.
Always blame technology.
That'll teach me for sure. Let me see. Oops. See if I can open this again. Get it going. It's quiet tonight. There's not very many people here. I don't know if it's me or if it's the topic.
I think people have been like back to normal life type of.
Oh, I know it's summer, so people aren't interested in bullshitting and hanging out on the internet too much.
I gotta go to bed soon too. My arm is sore.
Yeah, we'll give her a little bit here, and we'll hang out for a little bit. Use Bing. Is Bing a thing? Well, maybe we use we'll go old school. Oh, nope. Ask Jeeves. Is Ask Jeeves still around? 3 streams going on right now. Angus, if you want a plant package for your tank, just email me or message me, bud, and we'll put one together. And I can probably make something happen for you, and we'll see what we can do. 3 streams on. Remember who the important one is, though, shall we? Come on now. What else can you? Well, I already put Mike to sleep tonight. Nick said it was past his bedtime. Ames had to go to bed. Friday was fun, though. For those of you, I don't know, is Patrick still here? A couple of you guys. So Friday night, I happened to notice there's wasn't really anybody streaming, so I jumped on, and that actually turned into a good time. We had fun. So Jess jumped up. Patrick, Dragon Layer even jumped up. Talked to Ian for a while. Ian's setting up a pretty cool little saltwater tank. Tom was hanging out. He didn't talk too much. He was working on water changes. Dragon Layer's still here.
I totally missed that stream.
You did. Mm-hmm. It was fun. It was a good old time. So how's that drawing coming? You making any progress?
No, I'm slow. There we go. Maybe? No.
Yeah, it's looking good. It's getting there. Tony said he's out. Thanks. You appreciate it, man. Thanks for stopping by. Thanks for asking questions. Questions kind of run the show here on the stream. The more questions you guys ask, the more information or more I'm not saying I'm going to teach you the information, but somebody in here knows what's up. We got a lot of people. I like to think that we've got a pretty knowledgeable group in here, yakking most of the time. So yeah, we'll see you guys next time. Like I said, there should be a video probably tomorrow, if not Thursday for sure. Otherwise, we'll see you next Tuesday. I hope right here at 10 o'clock Eastern. And I know Riddle shared Friday night stream. Check that out if you want. Should be a fun little replay. I haven't watched it myself.
I gotta watch it.
But we had a good time. Unfortunately, I've been, fairly busy, and I'm only going to get likely busier away from the computer just because of the weather. So I haven't been able to hang out with many folks like Jeffro. I usually hang out with Jeffro and Phoebe. But I haven't been there lately. I've been trying to get I'm pretty much a regular in Dan's streams. Sometimes I get to talk more than others, though. And if you want this sweet t-shirt like I have, you can go to Jeffro's Fish Keeping at Jeffro's store. See if I can link for that guy.
Has he been streaming Saturdays?
I'm not sure. I haven't been getting notifications, so I'm not sure if he has been. I think they're moving into are they moving right now? Or just getting stuff set up. I know he's been posting some videos, but they're just a good time. So he's got some pretty sweet swag. If you want some Jeffro socks, I personally wouldn't buy Jeffro socks, but maybe you
Those
do.
leggings look pretty cool.
These guys,
yeah,
girls.
I'm gonna buy you those for Christmas.
I'll wear them on the stream. If you buy them, I'll model the Jeffro's leggings on the YouTube live stream, forever emboldened in all my YouTube glory. First win, Deborah. Congratulations. I don't win much there's some people that jump from one stream to the next all day long. I swear they have no jobs or lives, and they'll win all kinds of stuff. Myself, I try to poke in just occasionally. I think I won a gift certificate or something to Dan's Fish one time. That was pretty sweet. Teak Boy said Jeffro's hasn't been streaming. No, last Saturday, nothing. So I'm not sure. Like I said, I'd expect, it's not really, we're getting out of YouTube season where people aren't cramped up in their houses anymore because of the cold weather. The Rona stuff is kind of just, it's not disappearing, but people are getting more comfortable going out in public.
And people are getting shots.
So I'd expect, the live stream crowds to slow down a little bit. I'd expect myself, I said the past month, I haven't been very good about live streaming, let alone being in other streams. Life's busy. And
in the summer for fun?
Everything. While I do hanging out with you guys, this isn't my business. It's not my job. So this is just a hobby of mine, and I love, chatting and hanging out. But at the end of the day, it's just a hobby for me. So I'm not in it I didn't start YouTube stuff for the money. There's that. Really, there's not a lot of money to be made in YouTube unless you get gigantic, and that's just not what I'm interested in.
It wouldn't be fun then, right?
No.
I
don't want my hobbies to become a job. Like, I don't want to have to rely on it for money.
Yeah, I could tell you a story about that one.
And you'll see there's people that do. And if that's what they enjoy, that's fine. But this is my hobby. I like to come on here and learn from you guys and ask you guys questions and try to help you guys out.
He did it for clout.
So yeah, this is just for fun for me. And I saw somebody post, and I'm not going to mention names or anything, Somebody asked where they could find a certain thing in a Facebook group earlier, and I suggested somebody that I know well that has really nice stuff, and she said, "Well, he hasn't answered his messages." I believe it or not, even if people sell fish, they do have a life outside of answering Facebook messages. So give it a break. Just give it a rest. Wait, be patient. Plus, I don't even see like a lot of Facebook messages come in as message requests or whatever if it's not from somebody that you know or indirectly associated with. So cut people some slack. There's a lot of good dudes out there and gals.
I can't look at Facebook groups, aquarium groups anymore. It drives me nuts.
It can be tough, and I get into a lot of nonsense. Sometimes I'll get into, I wouldn't call it an argument. Like I'll try to help, and then if somebody argues, I'll try to help a little more, and then at some point in time, you just have to move on with your life.
Oh, so when we're over here, Rack from River Life. No, wait. His other channel. Ooh, what's it called?
He's got several of them. It's hard to keep up.
Pond Life.
Okay.
He's life.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, do you have a link for that? I'll probably give this. We'll hang out in nonsense for another 15 minutes or here. So here, call it 2 hours, and then I'll give up on it and move on with my life.
Oh no! Wait, Bird Garden. How many channels does Rack have?
I think he has 3 or 4. So I'm going to try to hide anything too crazy. So one of the things, you don't even keep up with your shrimp Facebook group. Shame, shame, shame.
What? My Facebook group?
That's what Patrick said.
That's not my group. I'm just the moderator on there.
What's up, Rack? Ears must have been burning.
Maybe we should get Rack in here. So party.
I'm always welcome. We'll give it, I got about 10 more minutes tonight, unless this gets crazy. I mean, if you are interested, we can chat. Just keep it civil and informative is all I ask. But there's the link. If a couple people want to chat, you're more than welcome. In the meantime, let's speaking of fish groups, we'll browse for a second.
Uh-oh.
So this person said they went to their local fish store, tested the water, and all 3 tanks, tanks tested high pH. Oscar would be okay, but might want to adjust from a Molly tank and guppy tank, both of which I recently had babies born. Question: should I lower it? And the best way to safely do for my fish. So my 2 cents. pH is probably the most overhyped and most worried about parameter in the hobby that 99% of hobbyists don't need to pay attention to. If you are breeding some very sensitive fish, like potentially some of the epistogrammas or some tetras, the best way to lower it would be to soften your water by using RODI for your water changes. Yeah, that'll happen sometimes, Deborah. Geek Boy's out. Have a good night, Geek Boy. Thanks for stopping by. Appreciate it. Let's see if there are any other questions. I try to just occasionally.
That's a huge group, isn't it? How many members are in there?
I don't even want to know. It's big enough to have the same question several times a day. What can you feed guppy fry? Giving first bites, guppy fry. Any fish that's big enough to eat baby brine shrimp. Baby brine shrimp are an excellent option for if you want something really small. Microworms are a great option. Vinegar eels aren't too bad. And if you want a dry food, golden pearls, the 5 to 50 micron size work great. And those are available at kensfish.com. Any other quick questions? So here's one about Flourish. Do you just put it directly in your tank? Yes. And like I said earlier, if you compare Flourish, so that's made by Seachem. They make Flourish, and they make what's the other Flourish? The macro one. Is it advanced or complete or something? Anyway, so Flourish itself isn't a complete fertilizer, and it is very weak itself to begin with. So I don't personally suggest using the Flourish line. Some people do. So there's Flourish, and there's Flourish Advanced, which I believe is the one's macros and one's micros. I think, I'm not positive. But Flourish, they sell you this entire line of fertilizers instead of an all-in-one like Thrive. Thrive is one bottle. You got everything you need in one bottle. It's super easy. You don't need to buy 4 or 5, different bottles at $8 to $15 a piece to finally get all your nutrients, and it just turns into a headache. So I don't know. I don't recommend the Flourish line for anybody.
Did you know Flourish sells a fundamental pack? Level 1 has Flourish, Flourish Excel, and Flourish Iron.
Is that what this guy does? Yeah, broad spectrum. See, again, look, carbon. They're saying that Excel. They're marketing Excel as carbon, which I've got beef with. Whatever. So you basically need both of their packs. You need level 1 and level 2 to get even close to all of what you actually want in your tank.
But the level 2 is the NPK, which is Flourish nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium.
So now is this? It doesn't say. So does it have 3 bottles in it? It looks like it.
One it has bottle. 3 tiny little bottles in it.
Three 100 milliliter bottles. Yeah, that's not going to last you very long because so you're gonna spend a lot of money. That's how that's going to go. So Patrick asked what I think about Easy Green. It's not a bad fertilizer. However, when compared to Thrive, Thrive does have a few things that Easy Green does not. One of them being iron, because iron can sometimes bond to phosphates, I think. Anyway, if it's not in a proper form. So Colin uses a different form of iron that doesn't get bound up in his. So if you use Easy Green, generally speaking, in order to dose iron along with it, you'll have to use Easy Iron. So I like Thrive better. It's like I said, it's more complete. It's a little bit more potent. You get more bang for your buck. So this is, like I said, Easy Green is $20 for a 500 ml bottle. That probably what's that treat? Claims to treat. Doesn't say directions. Their website. I don't know if my browser's broken or if their website's broken.
It's probably not your browser.
But I know Colin, 500 mils from Colin's $18, and that'll treat 5,000 gallons, I think. So I like Thrive better. Some people have, they all have their preference. There are, sometimes you have different reasons for buying stuff, even if there's 2 similar products. But that's all I'll say. I'm not here to talk crap about anybody. I just, we all have our experiences and what we prefer, and use what works best for you. Patrick said he stopped using Easy Green and his grips took off. It's good stuff. No, like I said, I personally don't use it. I'm not saying it's a bad fert. It's it's better than like the Flourish line stuff, or something juice. There is a juice fertilizer out there.
The grow juice.
I'll just say don't. Just don't.
Oh, that's funny.
It's green water. That's it. It's green colored water.
Speaking of Nile Oak tea, I really like his root tabs too.
Yeah, and so there's a bunch of different root tabs out there. Colin sells the Thrive caps, which is basically just a gel cap with an EI mixture in it. So his dry salt's in it, and that works great. What is it? Seachem, their root tabs actually aren't bad. Like if you're gonna buy any nutrients from
really expensive.
From Seachem, their root tabs aren't too bad, and it's more of like it's not a gel cap, it's a hardened compound. Like they take all the stuff and they squish it together super hard, so it breaks down slow. So it's not a bad root tab, honestly. It's just expensive, like really, really expensive.
Tell about the brand.
It is, and we talked about Osmocote before. I'm not an Osmocote guy myself. I think it leads to the potential ammonia bomb. But Deborah, I've got a bunch of bottles. It seems I've wasted my money on. Forgot what prompted me to buy products. However, I think I bought Thrive and forgot why. This is on point. If you do have a product and you're not sure how you feel about it, feel free to buzz me a question, Deborah. Email me, ask you like, hey, I bought this bottle. I don't know what it does. Can somebody help me out? And I'll definitely try to point you in the right direction. It may not be something that I personally do or don't have experience with, but I can definitely, I can do my research and give you my 2 cents based off my experience. And I know you sent me an email, Deborah. I didn't get it yet. Fish@gmail.com. And I'll help you out. 1 squirt a week for 4 months, no growth. Stop using it a month later. There were new leaves everywhere. Hey, whatever works, man. Said there are, and I'm not saying that that's one of them, but there are a lot of products on the market that are absolutely useless and still make companies tons of money. A couple examples would be like, you take it for what it's worth. Melifix and Pimafix, or it's like, I think Melifix is what, like tea tree oil, and Pimafix is like eucalyptus oil or something. Absolutely useless, in my opinion. Maybe there's some holistic thing that they do, but in my opinion, people see benefits from the associated water change that the directions suggest more so than from the actual stuff they're putting in the tank. Angus had Flourish switched to Easy Green. Not sure what to think about it. Ordered some plants in an Easy Planter from Co-op Monday. I would say Easy Green's going to be a better fertilizer than Flourish. Mixed reviews on Melifix. That's because it doesn't do anything. It'll put a cool little bubbly foam layer on top of your tank, depending on your surface vegetation, and that's about it. I said, what are some other products like pH up, pH down?
Yeah, I don't even sell that at the store.
It may swing your pH for like a few hours, and then it's just going to drop the other way. 1S, Deborah. So, or no S, sorry, Mike at all things fish@gmail.com. Maybe I typed it wrong before, but there it is again. Bottom colors. So cool. Do you guys have any other questions before we shut her down for the night? We're right at 2 hours. I think it seemed like some people learned something, and that was kind of the topic, or the goal of the topic is just to give you that overview and to kind of, maybe, drum up some questions in your head. I said, if you want to know more about anything, feel free to comment on the video after, or email me, or find me. A great way would be to, if you post on the Get Gills Facebook group, which I think most of the people in here are probably already on. But that's a good way to find me, and it's kind of a quiet group right now. That's a pretty good little place to find me there. I'll share that link in the chat. Thoughts on Pontifex? Anything that has fix in the name is generally junk. Generally junk. All right, Deborah, I got you. I got that email. But other than that, to the 12 of you that are still watching, that hung out for 2 hours, to anybody catching the replay, thanks a ton for stopping by. Thanks, Priscilla, for jumping on with us.
I was just doing art.
Thanks for showing us your art. I look forward to seeing it on the website. And again, SwissAquatics.com/discount/ATF. You might be able to treat yourself to something a little bit cheaper using the discount from the live stream. And she's got some cool stuff, so check it out. Dragon Larry, it is very quiet, unfortunately. We just need to stir up some more chat. But the chat that's there, generally speaking, seems to be a little less nonsense and a little more on point, which is the goal, and it's still growing. It's a fairly new group. Deborah Lewis, thanks for the kind words. Myrtle, as always, thanks for the help. Thanks to everybody, and have a good night. So we will see you all next time. Have a good one.